Welcome to the Flower Farm Sampler Quilt-Along series. I'm Shelley Kavana, author of the Flower Farm Sampler book, and it's my mission to help you make stunning quilts simply. If we haven't met before, I'm a quilt pattern and cross-stitch designer. I design fabric and I write quilting books like the Barnstar Sampler and the Flower Farm Sampler. You can find my patterns, fabrics, and books at your favorite local quilt shop, or you can find them online at our website at chorusquilts.com. You can also follow our quilty adventures on social media under the tag at Cora's Quilts. In our Flower Farm Sampler Quilt-Along series, we'll be working through all 18 blocks from my Flower Farm Sampler book, spread out over 12 months. To sew along with us, you'll need your fabric and the book. In these videos, also assume that you've prepped and cut your fabric pieces following the book's instructions. To make the blocks in the book, you won't need any specialty rulers, foundation paper piecing, or templates. Most of the blocks use my favorite stitch and flip techniques to create complex geometric designs with simple shapes. A few of our blocks do include triangles, which will piece oversized and trim down to perfection. All the stitch and flip basics are also covered on pages 10 through 13 of your book, so you'll definitely want to bookmark that section for handy reference. Instead of starting with block 1 and working our way chronologically through the book, we're going to begin with our smaller 8-inch blocks. This way, we can practice techniques on a manageable scale before tackling our larger and more complicated blocks. You'll find our complete schedule, my list of must-have and nice-to-have tool recommendations, and a free downloadable block checklist so you can keep track of your progress, all on our Quilt-Along homepage. We've left the link to that in the description box below. In this week's video, we're assembling our bellflower block, which is block number 14 in your book. Last week with our block 13 video, we did a deep dive into our first two stitch and flip shapes, flying geese units and square in a square units. If you haven't watched that video yet, pause here and go back and watch the block 13 video first, because we're building directly on those skills this week. In making our bellflower block, we're adding two new stitch and flip techniques to our toolkit: 2 at a time half square triangle units and some left-leaning diamond units. We'll combine these building blocks with some background fabric squares to create the bellflower block. While last week's starflower block was assembled in a 9-patch formation, this week we're working with quadrants assembled in a 2x2 layout. Remember that if you're new to half square triangles or you need some extra practice with those stitch and flip techniques, be sure to practice with some scrap fabric first before using the fabric for your actual quilt. When writing both the Barnstar Sampler and this Flower Farm Sampler book, one of my goals was making shapes as simple as possible to assemble. So while there are many ways to make half square triangle units, my favorite is this 2 at a time method. We'll piece these slightly larger than needed and trim them down to the perfect size for maximum accuracy. Start our half square triangle units, the 2 at a time method, the same way as we start any stitch and flip unit, by marking stitching lines on the wrong sides of either your A or your D squares. It doesn't matter which you choose, so I typically pick the lighter fabric, or however it's easiest to see my pencil markings. As you mark, remember to line up your pencil lead with the corners of the fabric square, not your ruler, for maximum accuracy. After marking your stitching lines, you'll place this marked square right sides together with the remaining square. Then, sew a 1/4 inch seam on both sides of the drawn line. You're actually aiming for what we call a scant 1/4 inch seam, which is just a thread width or two smaller than a true 1/4 inch seam. This gives us even more wiggle room when we are trimming our blocks down to size. Then we're ready to cut the unit in half along the marked diagonal line. You can do this using either your fabric scissors or your rotary ruler and cutter, whichever way works best for you. After pressing the seam allowances as suggested in the assembly diagrams in your book, you're ready to center and trim each unit to 2.5 inches by 2.5 inches. This is where a small rotary ruler with a 45-degree angle marked on it is very handy. We're going to line up that 45-degree line on the ruler with the diagonal seam of the block. And before trimming those top and right sides, make sure that you've left ample room to trim the bottom and left edges too. We'll do that in a moment. So with the 45-degree line lined up, trim the right and top sides. Then rotate the unit around so that the newly trimmed sides line up with the 2.5 inch marks on your ruler. Keep that 45-degree line on your diagonal seam and trim the remaining 2 edges to finish squaring up the unit. If you need a refresher on this technique, you can also find the full pictorial tutorial for half square triangles on page 13 of your book. The second building block for our bellflower block is a left-leaning diamond unit. And this block is made almost identically to our flying geese units from last week. The only difference is that we need to pay careful attention to the angle and placement of the sewing lines on our squares. So we're starting off by marking the stitching lines on the wrong sides of both our B and our E squares. First, we'll sew the E square to that background C rectangle. We're placing the E square at the left end of the rectangle, and we're making sure that our stitching line is running from the upper left corner down to the lower right corner of the square, just like it's pictured in the book. After attaching all of your E squares, you could take a break and take the time to trim and press. But I actually prefer to attach my B squares to the right end first. Then I can do all of my trimming and pressing for the entire block at once. Here's the key difference that sets this unit apart from the flying geese unit. When we sew the B square to the right end of that background rectangle, we need to make sure that our stitching line runs parallel or in the same direction as that first seam, rather than having the seam crossing over one another to form an apex like our flying geese units. As you're sewing, if you haven't trimmed your E square yet, be sure to flip its corner out of the way so that you don't stitch over it. Trim off your excessive corner fabric pieces and press your units towards those newly added corners. Once you've finished piecing your half square triangles and your diamond units, you're ready to assemble your bellflower block. As I mentioned earlier, this block is assembled in 4 quadrants. Paying careful attention to the orientation of the pieces, sew the half square triangle unit to the right edge of an E square, and then press. To finish the quadrant, you'll sew the diamond unit to the bottom edge. Make sure that you take the time to match the points where the half square triangle meets this diagonal seam on the diamond unit, a 1/4 inch away from that block's edge. Once you've assembled and pressed your quadrants, you're ready to sew them together into pairs. Again, make sure that you're taking up the time to match your points where the half square triangle units meet the diamonds. As you go to join the pairs together, if you followed the pressing instructions in the book, you'll find that your center seam will nest nicely, which makes it a lot easier to line up those points. I still like to use a pin to mark and secure the center points so that everything meets neatly. Because we have quite a bit of bulk in our center seam, I recommend spinning that center seam for the flattest possible finish. To do this, before pressing, you simply need to pop open the few stitches above the seam line to loosen the corners. Then when you go to press, you'll notice that half of your seam will naturally want to go in one direction, while the other half of the seam will want to lie in the opposite direction. There we have our finished bellflower block. You've also now mastered 2 at a time half square triangle units and stitch and flip diamond units. Join me next month for more stitch and flip fun as we tackle the lily and forget-me-not blocks. Thanks so much for sewing along with me today. You can post your photos in our Flower Farm Sampler Quilt Along Facebook group or on Instagram and Blue Sky using hashtag Flower Farm Sampler. And be sure to tag us at Chorus Quilts so that we can see your beautiful work too. Don't forget to grab your free Flower Farm Sampler checklist. You can find the link for the free download in the description box below. If you've enjoyed this tutorial, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more quilting videos. Hit the bell icon for notifications when we post new tutorials. Happy sewing, and we'll see you next time with another Flower Farm Sampler block.